So if you can see everything, so I am Kate Mittendorf. I am a curator on the Actionability Working Group for ClinGen, but I also work with the Baylor team, which right now Sai is our product owner and soon to be Neetu, for helping sort of communicate the needs of our work group to our software development team. And so I think Sai and I's goal today is to help you understand both our process and the tools that Sai's team has built for us really facilitate our capturing our process. And so my goal right now is to just help you understand operation flow, so that way you can understand when Sai is presenting each of the tools, how those work with our process really nicely. So I'm going to have a little space for questions. So, if you have a question about how the process works, I think it would be reasonable to ask that before we move into Sai's presentation. So this, just a brief background for anyone not familiar with Actionability Working Group. Our goal is to answer one of ClinGen's 3 critical questions, which is, what is the clinical utility of the genetic information and in our genomic knowledge base? And so we have developed a framework that provides a transparent and systematic evidence base for prioritizing genes based on their clinical actionability. And what do I mean when I say clinical actionability? Well, first, let me tell you about what our clinical context is. So we're asking a question about clinical utility or clinical actionability in the context of an adult or a child with an incidental or secondary finding via exome or genome scale sequencing. So this is not currently considered in the diagnostic setting, and this is not in the context of population-wide screening. This is basically just incidental/secondary findings, depending on how you call those. We're interested in the patient who's not previously diagnosed with a genetic condition, so this finding is new to them, and they may or may not have signs or symptoms of that genetic condition, but they don't know that they have it. And then the question of clinical actionability is, that definition is basically, it represents a known ability to intervene with specific actions and thereby avert or mitigate a poor health outcome, previously unsuspected risk of disease. So a really good example of something that might be actionable that people are probably very, very familiar with is something like BR1. And so if you have a pathogenic variant in CA1, we know that there are interventions such as surgery or surveillance that can, either delay or prevent in the case of surgery, or catch cancer earlier in the case of more frequent surveillance. And then we consider well-established clinically prescribed interventions, patient management, surveillance interventions, and then anything like a circumstance to avoid. And these interventions need to be specific to the genetic disorder under consideration. So that's what makes a gene disease association that we're considering if it has the interventions and we have a known ability to mitigate a poor health outcome using those actions. So when we consider a gene disorder pair, this is sort of our early process. We want to know whether or not we meet a threshold of actionability. So first, what happens is we have an expert working group. We have 2 expert working groups in both the pediatric and adult settings, and those groups select gene disorder pairs that they feel are important for us to assess based on their expertise, knowledge of the field, those sorts of things. We also get nominations from the community that we consider. And then we do a standardized review of the literature looking for meeting threshold criteria for actionability, and I'll show you those in a little bit. We also have community curators outside of our expert curation team that does the full evidence review, who do this early rule out step for us. And so they're it's really great to have them on board. And if that's something you're interested in, I can connect you with folks who could help you join that curation process. And then those folks and us do some scoping of gene disease pairs in reports, because our reports are more about a topic. So for instance, I mentioned BRCA1, that report encompasses both BRCA1 and BRCA2 because the topic is hereditary breast and ovarian cancer. So it's often common for us to add gene disease pairs to a given report. At that same time, we choose the most appropriate Mondo ID to represent the disorder under consideration that we pair with a given gene. And then topics or gene disease pairs that don't meet threshold criteria are presented to the AWG, who is able to grant an exception and have us go on to our more extensive curation if they feel that that is important. So the threshold criteria that I keep talking about are presented here. So we basically are trying to find I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is someone on mute? Okay. So we're basically trying to find a qualifying resource, such as a practice guideline or systematic review. And then if we are able to find that in our systematic search, we look to see if those guidelines indicate that there is an action that we can take that a person could take that would prevent or mitigate their clinical outcome. And so then we also ask which context it might be actionable in. Is it actionable in the adult? Is it actionable in childhood? And very important for us, we don't consider presentation in the neonatal period, so it has to present outside of the neonatal period, at least in some forms of the disease, or have a lower penetrance variants that present outside of the period. And then it's possible for something to pass our threshold if the penetrance is unknown, but if the penetrance is quite low, then we wouldn't necessarily pass the threshold. And then if you hit your threshold criteria for one or both contexts, you would proceed to the adult or pediatric working group both. But if not, then you would have to go through that exception process that I mentioned. Assuming a topic passes early rule out and meets these threshold criteria, we do a much more extensive literature review where we gather all of the guideline systematic reviews and meta-analyses, and also some supplementary evidence for anything that's recommended. We have a process for tiering the literature in terms of the strength of the guideline or systematic review, and we also have then a process by which we abstract all of the recommendations and evidence from those guidelines, and then synthesize that evidence into a summary, which reads basically like a summary of the existing guidance, along with any supporting evidence for any recommendations included therein. And then, and also includes things like penetrance and just an overview of the clinical presentation of the condition. And then a secondary reviewer actually reviews steps 1, 2, and 3 here and makes sure that they agree with the primary curator's abstractions and report, and they edit the report, usually fairly extensively, to make sure that everything is most representative of the process. And the report is reviewed by the Actionability Working Group, the adult, pediatric, or both, depending on the context that it met threshold criteria in. And sometimes folks identify some supplementary evidence that's not covered, things like primary literature that supports a recommendation, and they might that evidence that they want included in the report, or request us to do a search for supplementary evidence for a specific recommendation. And then at that time, they also select scoring pairs. So this is the outcome that they think there is evidence that we can mitigate, and the intervention that can mitigate or prevent that outcome. And so then they select those scoring pairs, which then go through the scoring process. So you can see that this is actually a rather lengthy multi-step process of curation that we're going through. And then when they score these pairs, they're considering basically 4 domains of actionability. What is the severity of the outcome? That is, what is the nature of the threat to health to the individuals carrying a deleterious variant? What is the likelihood? So you can think of that as, they're looking at the penetrance. What is the chance basically that that serious outcome that we're considering will materialize given a person having a deleterious variant? And then what is the effectiveness of the intervention? So basically, what evidence do we have that this intervention is good at preventing or diminishing the risk of harm? And for both likelihood and effectiveness, they also score the level of evidence. So it's not just a score of how actionable something is, but also what was the quality of the evidence that they're considering. And then they also score something that's relatively subjective, which is the nature of intervention, which is how risky, medically burdensome, or intensive is the intervention. So something like a total gastrectomy in the case of CDH1, that would get a very low nature of intervention score because it's very medically burdensome, very intensive. It has a lot of risk associated with it. Whereas something like regular invasive surveillance might get a much higher nature of intervention score. And then each individual scores each of those domains alone, sort of blinded to everyone else. And then we come together as a group, and the curator who was responsible for that topic leads the experts in a discussion of their preliminary scores. Sometimes those individuals change their scores in response to being persuaded by the other experts on the call. And then they have a final individual score. And then the ACI, which Sai will show you, is able to calculate a consensus score from those final scores. So basically the mode score is the consensus. And so then following that, we've actually just instituted a new process in response to requests from the steering committee to generate assertions. So this is for folks familiar with the gene disease curation work group. This sort of framework might look analogous, I suppose. And that was the goal, is to be somewhat analogous. And so based on the consensus score, we generate an automatic initial assertion that could be strong, moderate, or limited. And then folks who are on our expert working groups consider whether or not that assertion reflects their understanding of the body of evidence in terms of whether or not that gene disease pair is actionable. So they take the highest scoring outcome intervention pair, we generate this assertion, they have a discussion, and then they can change it, which for instance might include lowering the assertion level based on limited evidence or quality of evidence for any part of the score. It might also be taking something that received a strong, considering the rules for definitive and saying, okay, this definitely meets those subjective, or not easily they're not subjective, but they're not easily calculable rules. And so yes, we meet these criteria for definitive, and so they might bump it up to definitive. And then our assertion process is relatively going to be analogous to our scoring process, except for the initial assertion auto-generated. We have a discussion. Individuals can make their final assertion, and then we have a consensus assertion. And that's something that we're we're still working on developing and incorporating into our process. I think that covers our process. Are there any questions? I can't see like if people raise their hand or type.
Thanks so much, Kate. I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions for Kate? I do have a quick question. So at the current time, the gene disease pairs that you're looking at, they are all definitive in terms of clinical validity. Is that right? Or are you looking at
strong or definitive?
Strong,
I think is
okay.
Yeah. Is our current process is that we try to only select gene diseases that have been gene disease pairs that have been validated by the gene disease working group. So sometimes we get nominations from the community, and we don't have a gene disease curation for those. So then we sometimes will message the gene disease group like, hey, are you planning to consider this? Christy Lee sits on our group and is also involved with gene disease. So sometimes she facilitates that conversation. So.
Great. And yeah, and your group has really nice summaries online too. For folks who haven't seen the actionability summaries on the website, you give a lot of nice information. So yeah, it's a really good resource.
Yeah, I think Sai is going to show you a little bit more about navigating both the public resources that we have, the Actionability Knowledge Repository, and then also what the curation tools look like. So.
Okay, that's great. Any other questions for Kate before we hand over to Sai? All right. Well, thank you so much, Kate. That was great. And so if you can stop sharing your screen, and then Sai will be able to take over.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Jenny, can you see the screen that I'm sharing?
Yes, it can.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Jenny, for having the Actionability Curation Group in this meeting and giving us this chance to present on the tools and the process. And thanks to Kate for giving an excellent overview of the curation process. So I'm Sai Subramanian. I'm a lead programmer analyst at Baylor College of Medicine. I've been working with the Actionability Working Group for the past 2 years now. I manage the ACI and the Knowledge Repository. I work closely with Kate and Charisma and some other members of Katrina's team. And I also work with our internal developers to get this project happen. So now that you heard about the actual process, you're going to see where all this action happens. So I want to, hold on. Okay, so I want to show you how you can access the actionability tools. So first off, I will start with the ClinGen website. So many of you are familiar with the clinicalgenome.org. So Jenny was just talking about this. If you go to curation activities and you find clinical actionability over there and click that, you will reach this particular page. Probably not something that I wanted to do. Okay, so you click clinical actionability and you will head over to all the materials and the links that will take you to the Actionability Curation Interface. So as you can see, you will be able to view all the actionability results. All of those are publicly accessible. So that's available here, list of all the topics that have been curated in the adult and pediatric context and so on. And we also have the access controlled Actionability Curation Interface. In short, we call it ACI. So I'm going to refer to it like that. This requires a login, so you can reach out to the AWG, the Actionability Working Group coordinators, Kate, Charisma, or Christy Lee, to get access to this. So I will be going back and forth between my slides and also showing you where to get to these resources. So this is the public actionability website, which is actionability.clinicalgenome.org. We also have a test website, which is actionability.test.genome.network, so which is used internally by the curators to test new features or see if something got fixed and things like that. But if you want to, get a feel of how to use the actionability curation interface, then you can reach out to us. We can provide an access in the test website so you can get familiar with it. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly run through this process. Kate already mentioned a lot about the workflow, but I just want to highlight that the actual curation happens in the ACI, and then the public reports are released in the Actionability Knowledge Repository. So we have curators. Right now we have about 7 curators who are members of the knowledge synthesis team, and they use the ACI to document the entire evidence search process like Kate just mentioned. And then we have 2 working groups, which is the adult and the pediatric. So we have expert scorers. Here are the current numbers of expert scorers. So they use the ACI to independently score the topics. And then we have this, the set of consensus scorers who are mostly members of the knowledge synthesis teams. And they meet on a group consensus conference call and use the ACI to record all the scores and final consensus scores. And finally, all the reports are released, the curation reports, the summary reports, the rule out reports, everything that I'm going to show you now, they're released in what is called as the knowledge repository. And all the users, the broader scientific community can access them. So I'm going to show you first the public access knowledge repository, and then I will show you the curation interface. So the first is the public access knowledge repository. So this is actionability.clinicalgenome.org. When you go there, you will see this page. If you scroll down, you will see 2 links. One is to visit the public knowledge repository, and then the other is to visit the curation interface. There's some additional information about how to reach us and how to, if you lose your password and so on, you can find those details here. So first off, if you click the Actionability Knowledge Repository, you will, 1 second, sorry. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, before I go there, I wanted to show you the test interface. It looks very similar to the publicly accessible server, but it indicates that it's a test server, and all the things that I'm going to show you is just on the test interface because I don't want to mess up with anything on the live server. Okay, so this is how the Actionability Knowledge Repository looks. This is the dashboard. You will find the list of all syndromes and genes that were curated, the context in which they were curated, when was the literature searched, what's the current status of these reports, what's the release number, and also links to view the rule out report, the summary report, and versions of the released reports. And we have some summaries at the top here. So you can see adult summaries. If you click that, you'll see a tabular version of the overall and individual scores, and likewise for the pediatric context. So I'm going to just show you how this overall scores page looks like. So I'm just going to make sure everything displays here. Okay, so this is a view of the overall scores from released reports. Say, for example, for this particular topic, you see that there was just one outcome and intervention pair that was curated and scored. You can see the scores across the 4 categories that Kate just described and the overall consensus score. And you can also click and then visit the actual summary report with detailed evidence and references that were curated. I'm going to show you the other features in this page. You can search through the list of topics that were curated for any topic of your interest, or you can actually filter this for a gene of your interest. Like, say, example is say TP53. So when you start typing, it actually filters the table. So that's a convenient feature to look through topics that are of interest to you. There are also some other additional features that are available. You can filter to just look at topics in the adult context or just in the pediatric context. Alternatively, you can also filter this table by just topics that were released, that already that were ruled out, and some of them may be retracted, or the ones which are actively being curated. There are two other functionalities here. One is the export function, which allows you to export this entire table in a tab separated or comma separated value format. So you can get the whole data from this page, all the topics that have been curated by both adult and pediatric working groups, and view it in Excel and generate reports and things like that. We also have RESTful API endpoints, which can allow you to get this entire data in a machine readable and structured format. So let's say, for example, if you click on JSON nested, you will get a view like this. It's a list of all the topics that were curated, but in a structured format. So you can do some kind of machine learning queries and so on. Okay. And going back to this page, if you scroll down, you will see how each topic has been categorized based on the settings that were used. So this particular topic has both adult and pediatric, whereas some topics may have been curated in just one particular context. And here it shows the total number of topics. There have been 160 that have been curated. This includes both adult and pediatric. So this will be counted as two separate topics, Okay, and you can navigate through the different pages to see all the results. Okay, so I'm going to show you a rule out dashboard. So when you click on the rule out dashboard button, you will be seeing a view like this. So this is for one of the topics that passed in the adult context, but failed in the pediatric context. So you just saw Kate showing you all these questions. So this particular topic did not pass the pediatric context. So the curators were able to use the ACI to add the evidence and everything for the adult context, and while the pediatric context was released as there's no actionability for this. So this is an example of one that was ruled out. Another example of a rule out report where both adult and pediatric contexts passed. This is how it looks. So you can see that several questions were answered and both adult and pediatric says yes. Okay. Moving on, I wanted to show you. So this, you get to the rule out report by clicking here. If you want to look at the actual summary report, you go click one of these buttons, which is marked as A for adult or P for pediatric, and you will reach this page. So this is an example of an adult summary report. This is for Marfan syndrome. And Jenny was just talking about how these reports are structured. So this is how they're structured. At the top, you have some nice links to go back and forth between the adult and pediatric and look at the release history for this particular adult summary report. Or if you want to look at the pediatric summary report and look at the pediatric release history, you have convenient links over there and all the different statuses. If you go down, you will see that this particular topic was curated for just one gene, and this is the condition. And you will see the detailed evidence that was entered, categorized across different categories, like prevalence or clinical features, national history, and so on. And you will also find the references that were entered within the ACI from where all these, all the evidence was curated from. So if you just scroll through the report, you'll also see the tiers. This is also marked within the ACI. The curators come up with the tiers for each level of evidence to indicate the level of evidence. Okay. You scroll down, all these different questions are answered. These are entered within the ACI. And you can see that for this particular topic, the AWG has scored two outcome intervention pairs. One is this clinically significant aortic aneurysm and aortic surveillance. So that's the outcome intervention pair. And there's another one. And they score each outcome intervention pair across the 4 categories. And then the final consensus score is generated. And all this is reported. And you can also notice that since this one just has one gene, both the outcome intervention pairs were scored for that particular gene. Here's a description of the tiers for the sources of evidence. If you want to look at the scoring key, that's linked there. The literature search was performed on this particular date and later updated in 2019, and you see the reference list. So this is how the summary report is typically structured. Going back to the splash page, you can also look at different versions of this report. So as you can see, Marfan syndrome, it's at release 2.1.2. So there was a major upgrade that was done, which changed the release number from the 1.00 series or one series to 2 right now. So when you click on that, you will be taken to this particular page, which is, okay, let me show you the adult. This is the update history for adult context. So you can see who curated this particular topic and when was it released, and also links to the actual summary reports. And it just gives you a quick snapshot of what changed, you know, between this and this. It's very useful to see that, because at version 1.1, the outcome intervention pairs were slightly different and they were scored slightly differently. But when they made an update to 2, you know, the outcome intervention pairs were changed and also they were rescored. So these kinds of things can be quickly seen here, and some notes about what happened, why was it released and re-released, and so on. Likewise, you will find a report for the pediatric context as well. Okay, so far I've been showing you all the publicly accessible things. So now I'm going to show you what the curators actually do in the ACI. So I will move on to the curation interface. So this requires login, and you will probably need to contact the AWG to get access. So once you log in, you will see a very similar splash page, but with few extra details. It is going to show you who you're logged in as, what are your roles, and also an option to sign out and so on. And also this gives the curators a way to start curating a new topic. So when they hit create new, they will be able to start entering a new gene disease pair. So they have to enter a syndrome name, which is required, maybe a brief description, which is optional. And they select what context they want going to curate on. They enter details like the gene, OMIM ID, orphanet, and like Kate was just pointing out, the Mondo IDs, and also a preferred Mondo to indicate the AWG curated this topic for this particular Mondo, and also indicate the context for the gene disease pairs that were entered. They can keep adding multiple gene disease pairs or remove them as needed, and then hit the create button to start curating a topic. So once that part is done, you will see the same 3 icons that we saw earlier, but an extra one, which is the button to take them to the curation interface. So once you click that, you will go to the actual ACI. So now you're in the ACI view. So the top has some convenient buttons to take you back to the landing page to show you the rule out report. The curators can quickly access the rule out report from this view. The curators can also look at the pediatric or adult summary reports or the version histories from this view. So as and when they are typing and saving, they can actually open the summary report to see how it appears in that summary report view. So the first panel here shows the topic name, the overview that they entered, and also the 2 different contexts. If they are curating different sets of genes across the 2 different contexts, it's going to appear here. And at any point during the curation or during the when they revisit and do curation again after new evidence is available, they can go here and edit the gene disease pairs. They can add new ones. They can remove some that are not relevant to a particular context and so on. So this is all editable. This small panel on the side shows what's the current status of the adult and pediatric context and who was editing it last. And one thing to note is that it's perfectly possible for the curators to keep editing in one context. Say, for example, they have been editing the adult context, but they've already curated and released the pediatric context. That's allowed. So it will say that one adult context is collecting, they're still collecting the evidence, But in the pediatric context, it has already been released. So the ACI allows that. So independent of the context, they can actually edit the same topic. So this particular page shows the early rule out survey. So before I get to that, I'm going to show you the left panel menu. So this is how the curators can access the different stages of curation. So first is the early rule out process. They record the questionnaire and the answers. Then there's literature search, there's stage 2, and adult and pediatric scores. So we have set up ACI in a role-based, permission-based manner. So people who are expert scorers, for example, they will not be able to see or edit the first 3 sections. They will only be seeing either the adult or pediatric score. And even beyond that, the roles are specific to a particular context. So expert scorers who are part of adult AWG will not even see this pediatric score menu item at all. Likewise, for pediatric, they will not be able to see the adult score. But we have some scorers who are in both adult and pediatric working groups, so they will be able to see both. The curators and members of the actionability knowledge synthesis team will be able to see all of them, all the items in this menu. And so the admins, like I can see as well. So I'm going to be showing you each of them, but we'll probably do a quick run through of all these steps. So the early rule out survey has all the questions. These are very user-friendly widgets. You know, you can just toggle back and forth to mark an answer. If needed, you can actually enter some additional notes and so on. And this information will be saved. The final survey will be saved. So once this is saved, you actually mark as complete or something and then save it, then it gets, you will be able to view these in the rule out report that I just showed you earlier in the ACI Actionability Knowledge Repository. Okay, so that's the early rule out. Next is the literature search. So if you click on literature search, you will, hold on. So you will see a page like this, which allows you to capture the literature for both adult and pediatric context within the same place. One thing I wanted to highlight is that this particular topic, Marfan, like I showed you in the report, it was originally searched, the literature was searched back in 2015, but they did an update of the literature in 2019. So in these past 4 years, a lot of things might have changed. So you can actually see what was searched back in 2015, what were the different sources that they searched and what kind of search terms they used, how many hits they got. So this is all in structured format. It's captured in structured format, keeping in mind that in the future, we will be able to use all this structured information to do some sort of semi-automated searching and notify the users when new hits are available and so on. But as of now, this is all done manually by the curators and entered in. It will allow you to visit these different sources right from here. You can delete the source or you can edit or add new, all these functionalities are available. So you can see this was done in 2015 and in 2019, they just revisited a couple of sources and then did the searching. So you can actually, I'll just show you how to add a new source. So you can actually add a new source. The list of approved sources are available. New sources can always be added. The search term that was used and in what context it was searched for, and the number of hits and any other additional notes are recorded. So this is about the literature search, and finally they can save this whole thing. And we've also given some, added some convenient features in the ACI so that the curators don't have to re-enter the whole search. So they can actually copy the entire search that was made and then just make some quick edits and save it at a later date. So those kinds of convenient features are available. Okay, the next is the stage 2, which is the actual evidence curation process. So you see that there are lots of steps here, starting with entering the outcome intervention pairs. So once they enter the outcome intervention pairs in this widget, they can assign the context, provide some descriptions and so on. And one thing you want to notice is that for each outcome, there can be one or more interventions nested under that. So that's something I just wanted to point out. And you can add new outcomes or add new interventions to the existing outcomes. The next thing I wanted to point out is the actual evidence collection process. Okay, yes. I will get to this gene disease association in a different, for a different topic, just to explain what that is. But before that, I just wanted to show you the 4 major categories: nature of threat, effectiveness, threat materialization chance, the nature of intervention, and also what is the chance that clinical detection can be escaped. All these categories, they all look pretty much the same in terms of the ACI presentation. So I'm just showing an example of patient management. The users can add a new patient management, provide recommendation text, which can be copy pasted, or you know, they can type in right here. Then they can assign a tier, assign the context in which this particular recommendation is applicable. Say, for example, if there's something related to pregnancy, then it will not be applicable in the pediatric context, and so on. They can add new references right here and then link those references with each of these recommendation texts. So you can see that this particular patient management section has a lot of recommendations, and one of them has several references, and so on. I just want to show you another example, which is the penetrance section, which is slightly more structured, because this field, the penetrance, actual penetrance values are, you know, like controlled access. You have to select them from a drop down, and you can provide additional notes. And it looks pretty much the same. The curators also have an option to link outcomes with the recommendation text, 1 or more outcomes if they want. Yeah, so that's about the evidence curation step, where they enter the evidence and then link it with references. And the last thing I wanted to show you is the scoring section, which looks like this. So now I have the adult score for one of the 4 sections that they score, which is effectiveness. This is how the scoring section looks for an individual expert scorer. So Kate explained about how individuals independently they can score without knowing what the other expert has scored. So they log in to the ACI, and then they will be able to quickly view the recommendations. So this section is not editable at all. So they will be able to review all the text that was entered by the curator, what were the references, maybe visit the references if they want. And then they will go to this panel where they can actually look at the outcomes and interventions. So if they expand the outcomes and interventions, they will be able to score. This is for the intervention. So interventions, in the case of interventions, effectiveness and likelihood of outcome, only these 2 categories have the extra evidence level. The other 2 categories, severity and nature of intervention, just have the number scores. You'll actually see that in the consensus page better. So they can actually enter the score and the evidence level, and then they can add some additional notes. They will be doing this for both the outcome interventions, and then they'll hit save. It'll get recorded in the ACI. And finally, when the group meets during the summary, consensus summary scoring call, they will be seeing this kind of a view. And this will be accessible only by the users who have the consensus scorer role, which is mostly members of the KST, the knowledge synthesis team. So they will be able to score, look at the individual scores in a single page. This is applicable to a particular outcome. And as you can see, severity has just the number scores. Likelihood has both the number score and the letter score. And they can also look at the intervention. For effectiveness, it's the letter and number score, and the nature of intervention is just the number score. And they will have a lot of discussion during this call. There are notes that have been entered by different expert scorers. And they will review all these notes, whoever is leading the consensus scoring call. Attendance can be recorded. There is an option to add or remove people who attend the consensus scoring. So all this is captured and recorded, and it's auditable. Additional notes can be provided. And then once they do all these processes during the consensus scoring call, they can compute the overall score for this outcome intervention pair. So it will sum up all these values. Even if they've adjusted something, it will take everything into account and finally sum up all these values, and the score for this outcome intervention pair is generated. Likewise, they will do for the next outcome intervention pair, and both outcomes and intervention pairs have been scored, and they will finally save the final scores. This process, everything is captured, it's versioned. You can actually see that there is a way to see the curation history as well. So every single thing that's recorded by the curators or the expert scorers, it's tracked. So that way we can trace back to what was edited, when it was edited, and so on. So the entire process is completely recorded and versioned. So this is the end of the ACI. I just wanted to show you one other topic. So this is myofibrillar myopathy. So when the curators go back to a topic that was already released, they see this view. It says that this topic has been released. So to edit or revise it, you have to reopen this. So that also gets recorded and versioned. This just gives a quick summary of the what was released. I wanted to highlight one thing here. If you can actually notice, this particular topic has 3 genes. The curators chose to score one outcome and the outcome intervention pairs differently for FLNC gene and differently for DES. So you can actually see that here recorded within this thing called scoring group. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how that's captured within the ACI in the next couple of minutes. So you can reopen the topic. When you reopen the topic, actually I wanted to show that. So when you reopen a topic, which has been curated in the adult context, it actually allows you to also reopen it in the pediatric context. So if you note that myofibrillar myopathy was never curated in the pediatric context. So this particular option allows the curators to reopen in just one or both contexts. And that's possible from here. So once they reopen, it's the same ACI page. I just had this ready to go so I can show you all. This is the only other widget that I didn't show, which is about gene disease association. So this was a feature that was added last year when we wanted to allow the curators to associate gene disease pairs differently and then score them differently. So they wanted to score the gene DES. So they create a scoring pair group. It can be actually one or more genes. You know, it doesn't have to be just one. In this particular example, it happens to be just one in each group. So they use this particular widget. I'm not going to go deep into this, but just to indicate that outcome intervention, same outcome intervention pairs, in this case, clinically significant cardiac involvement and cardiology management as intervention, the same outcome and then a different intervention, but they have been scored differently for each gene, DES and FLNC. So that's allowed using this particular widget. So how does that actually look in the summary, scoring summary? So you can see that clinically significant cardiac involvement scored for DES looks like this. With these 2 interventions, they will score them just like how I explained earlier. And for FLNC, it will look like this. And how does it look in the report? We're going to see that. So this is that report. And if you actually scroll down all the way to the bottom, you will see that there were 2 scoring groups, and the outcome intervention pairs were scored differently for the different genes. So this was the last thing I wanted to highlight in the ACI. So the ACI is a very rich application, lots of functionalities. I don't think I did enough justice to show a lot of these minute details. But I think this gives you a good overview of what can be done within the ACI. And just like how Kate pointed out, we can open out sections of the ACI. For example, just the early rollout report, we can open out that section for community curators to access the ACI and just do this rollout survey. So that can be possible. Or maybe we just have community curators do the literature search, then that can be possible as well. And ACI gives nice warnings everywhere. You know, if you forget to save something, it'll ask you, and then it'll indicate in different places where you need to, where the curator needs to do certain things. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my slide deck to finish the rest of my slides in the next 1 minute. Really run through this. So this is just to show the monthly visits to the Actionability Knowledge Repository. As you can see, the blue indicates the public repository. So more number of people access the public repository, and ACI is used only by a very small number of curators and expert scorers. So obviously that usage is low, but you can also see that in April, more number of curations were done in the ACI, or maybe some revisions were done and so on. So it's nice to see the trend using our logs and Google Analytics and so on. And the last thing is about the assertion work that Kate just pointed out. I'm not going to show this, but we're developing a dedicated microservice to generate actionability assertions. And then once that is done, this is a mock-up of how the assertions will look like in the ACI. You will see a summary table. And also the reports will be updated to show the actionability assertions at the level of each gene disease pairs. Lastly, I would like to thank members of our team. I work with Alex. I've been working with Alex for the past 7 years, and it's sort of a bittersweet moment because I'm leaving the lab next week to join a different position. So Neetu Shah is going to take over as the product owner of the ACI. And ACI is one of my really favorite projects because I've had excellent collaboration with our ClinGen Actionability Working Group. I have to say my special thanks to Katrina, Kate, Charisma, and the other chairs and co-chairs of the ACI and the curators. And also acknowledge other lead engineers of our team. Andrew Jackson is the lead software architect, and Arturo is a new junior programmer in our team who has been contributing to this work. So, and we also have, I would like to thank past members of the lab who initially started the Actionability Curation Interface project. Thanks so much. I'm open to taking any questions.
Thank you so much, Sai. Does anyone have any questions for Sai? It's really great work, and it's amazing to see the number of visits to the information on the website. So it just really shows what a terrific resource this is. So yeah, really great work from everybody in the Actionability Working Group.
Thanks, Jenny.